Hi everyone. So remember how in last episode I told you that we'll create tests and controllers for our notification system? Well, it turns out I lied. So yeah, in this episode we'll just continue creating new components to our system, and we'll create a universal settings system. This will allow us to read and save some settings that will be able to be attached to any model that we may need. Note that these settings, they aren't really suitable for stuff that you will need to scan from your database, or something that will change often and has to be validated on every request. I mean, this won't really be an issue, but yeah, it will be a problem when it comes to the database. You could define a function to read the default settings for a given model, but it won't be ideal. But yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so let's create those two models. The first one will be called setting default. Let's also create a migration. And the second one will be simply called setting. I'm naming it setting default and not like default setting in order to have them two side by side in the database when it's sorted by the table name. You can name it default setting. It's not really important. All right. So let's start by customizing this migration. So here we want to save a couple of things. We want to save a name of certain setting. This can be a string, this can be an int. We could go with int, to be honest. Yeah, let's go with unsigned tiny integer. This will be name, or well, let's call it type. We'll have a string called default value, which can be nullable. We'll have an unsigned small integer for the model type. And we also want to ensure that we have no duplicates within a given model. So we'll create a unique index for the type and model type. Now, when it comes to the second migration, here we would want to have a foreign ID that references our setting default ID. We will have an unsigned small integer for the model type. And we'll have a foreign ID for the model ID. And we'll also have, the value that's overwritten in the setting model, which will also be a nullable string. Okay, so now we can create a trait which will be used to share this setting logic between our models. So let's call it has settings, and let's make it a trait. We basically want to create a relationship here to settings. So this will morph many setting class by model. Morph many is the return type that we want here. And let's give this trait to our user. Has settings, that's great. Let's save this. Let's run our migration. Okay, so what we want to do basically is create a method called getSetting, which will accept a key, and will resolve our setting, and then it will return the value. But in order to do this, we obviously want to create some sort of enumeration for our setting. So let me just create a setting type here. And let's create a sample use case here. So we could do something like date format. We could do something like selected team. So yeah, let's just use these as an example. Maybe let's add some more types. For example, notifications muted, and yeah, let's just use that for now. So this would be a bool, this would be an int, and this would be a string. I know this may not make a lot of sense, but we'll just use that as an example. All right, so our getString method would get a setting type, and here what we would want to do is basically return settings, where type would be type, and if we do not have this setting, we would return the default settings. But we don't want to make two queries here, and we don't want to call that every time this happens, and we want to get this setting. So what we could do is we could create a function which returns all of our settings, and this would return an array of all of our settings. So here we would create a more advanced SQL function. So we'll return a setting default, where setting defaults dot model type is this getMorph class, and we want to join that with settings. And here, okay, let me just get it and then cast it to array, because this it will keep highlighting that there is a type error. So here we want to join it on settings default. Okay, settings setting default ID equals setting defaults ID on model type. No, we just want to check the model ID, and we can call this getKey. And I think we have to wrap it in. Yeah, because it's not where, it's on. And now we need to wrap it in DB row, because otherwise Laravel would cast it as a constant, and we don't want that. All right, so before we can even test that, we should create add these default settings to the database. So we could do it in a in a couple of different ways. I'll just create a migration, add initial settings. Okay, so here let's create setting default. And let me quickly check what fields we added there. I think we missed one thing. We want to add casting here. So we should add an unsigned tiny integer called cast, which will show us what type that field should be casted to. And while we are at it, we should also create a new enumeration for the cast type. So setting cast type. And we can just boolean will be 0, integer will be 1, and string will be 2. That works. Okay. So let me just roll back the migration and run it again. Oops. Oh, right. Okay, let's just keep it for now. Let's create this migration, and then we'll be able to fix that issue. Okay, so how did we call it? Type default value. Well, I'll just copy that because I keep forgetting what we added there. So the type for this will be setting type, date format, default value will be YMD HYS, model type will be user get morph class, and then the cast will be a string. That is correct. It's setting cast type. Let's clean up the code here and let us just create the default settings for the rest of the examples. Default value for notification muted would be 0. It would be a boolean. And then we have the one for selected team. Let's just go with default value of 0, and this will be an integer, for example. And here we can setting default query where in type delete. All right, so now if we run the migration again, it will throw a mass assignment exception because we didn't change the guarded to an empty array. While we are at it, we can also do this with our setting model. And now if we run it again, it's passed. So that's cool. So now let us test our getSettings method. User first, getSettings. Oh, it should be a left join here. Because if we do a join, we'll remove any columns that, like, if there are no settings that match this condition, then we wouldn't get any results, and now we can see them. So yeah, we did get something that casting is a bit wrong. So we can fix that by specifying what we want to select, and we won't be operating on models here either way, so that shouldn't really be an issue. But yeah, let us fix that. So we'll select raw, and we'll select setting defaults, dot type. Then we'll select if there is settings, we'll select if null, settings value, or settings default value as value. That is correct. And we also need the cast information. So setting defaults.cast. Okay. So now if we restart our Tinker, user first get settings, we'll get our type, cast, and default value. Okay, that seems quite alright. The problem here is that our values are not casted yet, so we need to cast them. So we can just pipe them through an each. Copilot is extremely smart. This is kind of scary. So yeah, we'll just iterate over them, override the value with casted value, then plug the values and map them, cast them to an array. So now we need to create a private function called cast settings. This will get a setting type and cast type. And for now, it will return either a bool or an int on a string or null. So here we want to match the cast with our wait, we wouldn't get type here, we would get value, right? So this will get a value, nullable value, and then we'll just cast this value to either bool, an int, or a string. So let's just call cast settings here. Let's pass the value and let's pass setting cast. And we also want to add a cast here. Setting cast type. And I think okay, this doesn't work because we should call this cast setting and not setting cast setting. Okay, so we get our 0, which is a string. We got our boolean, which is now properly casted to a boolean, and we got our int, which is casted to int. So that's pretty cool. So now going back to our getSetting method, we could just return. We could let's say this to a variable. We'll just get settings. And now we want to return settings based on the value key, type value, sorry. I want to return null here. In case we request a setting type that isn't on this model, I probably just want to throw an exception. So if there is no RI key, type value settings, we'll just throw new exception, couldn't find that setting. And let's clean up the code here. All right, so let's restart the Tinker and let's call getSetting, and we'll call setting type, selected theme. We get 0. We can try date format. We get our date format. The problem with this is, these won't really change that often. So what we could do is we could just cache them. So, we could add cache remember, user settings, this, let's change this to quotes, this ID, this updated at, we'll cache it for, an hour, for example, and then our function will just return this thing here, and this should work. The only thing that we need to be cautious is that we obviously want to invalidate this cache as soon as we save a new setting. So maybe we could just create a method here called store setting, which would get setting type, which would get a value, and we could, I think that's it. And this probably won't return anything. So the first thing that we want to do is get the default setting, where type is type, where model type is this get morph class. First, if there is no setting, let's throw new exception. Oh, we can just use this exception. Setting not found. So now we can just call update or create. We can pass setting default ID, and here we can pass value. And after this is saved, we can touch this model in order to update the updated at, or we could extract this into a method and just manually invalidate the cache. It's up to you. I will just touch the model. So yeah, so now we need to test if the default settings are truly working, because now we were just pulling the values from default settings, but we need to check if when we store the actual new setting, are we going to get the new value? So let's go with something like that, which is the US time format. Let's save that. We got null, we didn't get any exceptions. That's great. And now if we call our get setting, we are going to get this new value, which is pretty cool. And it seems that our cache invalidation is also working. So that's even better. So that's mostly it. What we could also do is we could add a helper method called store settings, which would accept an array. We could make it into a DTO to make sure that it's not we are not passing any wrong data, but for now we are just going to trust the programmer. Let's assume that they know how this method should be called, and we'll just store the setting from key. We can do setting type try from scalar. Let's just do this. And that's fine, but if we are saving 10 settings, we would update this model 10 times. I don't think that's necessary. So we can add a bool here called touch, which by default will be true. And, if this, if touch, then we can execute this method. And here we can just pass false to not update this, the updated at timestamp with every setting that we are saving. All right, so that's everything I have prepared today. I hope you liked it. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate and ask them in the comments. I hope you guys will have a great day, and yeah, see you in the next episode.